Hola, mi gente. Welcome to episode 7 of Books and Bachata, the podcast. I am your hostess, Ms. Malcolm Hughes, and the goal of this podcast is to discuss love and life lessons I've learned the hard way, but mostly from books and bachata. And our topic for today is giving grace when it's not warranted or deserved. And this was inspired by the Netflix documentary from the series Untold, The Girlfriend Who Didn't Exist, the Manti Te'o story. But before we get into it, I want to set the mood with the right musical vibrations. So let's go ahead and Vida by Sin Bandera. And I absolutely love that song. I think it's beautiful. I think it makes me feel calm and peaceful. And I think it's representative of a very human place of deep desire and the yearning to no longer feel alone, the yearning to have someone or people in your life who make you feel seen and make you feel as if you're not the only person you have in this great big world. So I think that song is very appropriate for today's topic because I think that as we get into the story, what you'll realize is that there's a lot of desire and yearning to unpack here. And so, to get into our topic, if you have not seen it, the episode of the Netflix series, as so eloquently phrased by Cinema Blend, is a decade ago, Manti Te'o was in the headlines as a national joke and disgraced sports figure after it was learned that his girlfriend, who had supposedly died on the same day as his grandmother and whose memory he dedicated his senior year of Notre Dame football to, had never existed. And that is the essence of this story. So, in this three-part docu-series, no, two-part, sorry, in this two-part docu-series, we really get to delve into exactly what happened with Manti Te'o. I was trying to remember where I was at the time that this was all occurring and why. It's like a vague memory, but not something that I was tuned into. And yeah, I was graduating from college and grad school. I had a lot going on. Had a lot going on in my world, in my life at that time. So I wasn't really extremely tapped into this story. But in essence, we really do follow Manti Te'o. We get the background on his story, his love of football, his journey to becoming a star college player, right? We learn about his heritage and his family's background. We learn about the religion aspect and how that was very impactful in Manti's life and how he really focused on God when making decisions. And this is important because it comes up again later. And so, with this, we then have a young man who is very cultured, very dedicated to his family, to his community, to his religion, who has a strong desire to go to USC to play football, and someone that he looks to. He says, like, I'm going to go to USC. I've made my decision. That's my plan. That's my dream. And he says to him, like, yeah, you can go to USC and be just another Polynesian football player. But I always saw you at somewhere like Notre Dame where you could be the one and only Manti Te'o. And right before that, he had prayed to God for a sign, like, God, If this isn't what you want me to do, please send me a sign. I know for one, I have made that prayer. Like, listen, Lord, I'm not seeing it. If this is what you want from me, God, universe, ancestors, is this is what you want me to do, then send me a sign because I'm not seeing it. Or I'm really invested in this, and if this isn't what you want from me, please send me a sign and hear me clearly. I've always gotten a sign. It's always been quickly delivered. So just like Manti felt that that was his sign, and he was gonna go to Notre Dame. That was it. The rest is history. But for any of us who have attended PWIs, predominantly white institutions, for my graduate degree, I attended a Ivy League institution, which is at the top of being PWIs, which is institutionalized. The foundation is centered and rooted in continuing the legacy of America. With that is whiteness, like that culture. And I bring that up because, similar to Manti, I grew up in a community that was predominantly Black and Mexican. So that was really my background. I was rooted in Black culture, fully aware of Latino culture, and for the majority of my life, except for with a few other people that I met in either school or religious context, but in my after school intimate immediate community, I was surrounded by people who looked like me, who understood my culture, right? Even when I went to college for undergrad, I went to what I consider the HBCU of Chicago. It's not technically an HBCU, but it is a predominantly Black institution. And so, with that, when I made the transition to graduate school, it was a bit of a culture shock. It was, right? And I was in a major American city. And so I still had access to people who looked like me. I still had access to the religion. I was heavily practicing Islam at the time, right? It was a very large Muslim community in that city. So we even had organizations on campus, right, that really, I wouldn't say catered to my cultural identities, but there were opportunities for me to engage, right? And so that's important because Manti did not have that. He came from Hawaii and now he was in Indiana. Listen, it's cold. It's that someone who grew up in the Midwest, and I grew up in a major city in the Midwest. So this is less of that, right? It's cold, it's rural, it's white, it's not his religion, right? Heavy Catholic community. That's not how he identifies. That's not his religious background. So even though he's this major football star, he feels very alone, isolated, right? I'm laying this foundation because it's important to our story. He's very alone, very isolated. He's having a hard time adjusting. He's having a hard time adjusting on multiple levels. He's having a hard time adjusting to college celebrity football fame. He's having a hard time adjusting to the culture there. But at his core, he's still a well rounded young man who has innate leadership abilities. So he's not letting that show, right? As someone who considers herself a recovering perfectionist, I get it. And so with this, he has a young woman reach out to him who is of a more similar cultural background. She reaches out to him via Facebook with a friend request. He's intrigued. She's attractive. She seems nice. They start conversing. He's into it. And he does do his due diligence. He reaches out to others because there are some friends online and like mutual friends, right? People that would know, that they both know. So he reaches out to them. And he's like, hey, do you know this girl named Lene? What do you know about her? XYZ, right? So he does due diligence in that sense. And people are like, oh, yeah, I know her. I've spoken to her a couple of times, blah, blah, blah. Now, it's an argument to be made of like that was weird because if I reach out to someone and I'm like, hey, do you know this person? I want to know that you've met them in person. I want to know that you've hung out with them. How is their personality? Did they seem sane? Is this someone you think I would get along with, right? But I don't know if it's the way that it was edited. But for the sake of this documentary, no one had actually met Lene because Lene was actually out here catfishing and scamming people. But everyone was like, yeah, I know Lene. Yeah, I've spoken to her. Yeah, she's cool. When no one had actually met her because at that time, and the person has since transitioned and they now identify as female, but at this time they were still male. And they were behind this fake account of Lene. And the reason why they created this account of Lene is because they didn't feel like, well, one, they didn't really understand all of who they were yet. They didn't feel like they could be themselves, and they weren't able to get the attention that they desired. So they created this profile of Lene, took these pictures from a girl they attended school with, posted them online, created fake profiles, actually used their actual profile as a relative of Lene so it could appear that Lene was a real person, right? They definitely did the legwork to ensure that Lene appeared to be a real person. Now, all of this progresses. They have a relationship. It is arguably an unhealthy relationship at times. However, they do have a relationship. So they date. This goes on for years. Every time that Manti wants to meet Lene, Lene has an excuse. Or every time they're trying to video chat, Lene puts forward some reason why they can't. It's like, oh, I can see you. You can't see me. My camera's broken. Whatever, this goes on for years. Now, mind you, Manti is a young, popular, successful college football star. So eventually, he begins to pull back for whatever reasons, focuses on other things. And Lene creates this fantastical tale of, oh, she got hit by a car. Oh, it's laughable. She's hit by a car. She's diagnosed with cancer. It's this ongoing story, and as she's like dying in the hospital, if Manti speak to her, and it's like, oh, Manti, your voice is the only thing that has caused her to have a reaction. So Manti's like, oh, right? Manti wants to feel needed. He likes that feeling. He's like, oh, I'll call her every day. And so with this, they then begin to become closer, right? More of a connection that's reinvested there. And so this continues on for another period of time. And eventually, when Manti is having arguably the worst day of his life, right? And Lene had been a very controlling and toxic girlfriend. When Manti would pull away, they would send really like controlling text messages or leave voicemails and be angry. And they had spoken on the phone multiple times, so in Manti's mind, Lene was Lene, and Lene's voice was stellar. It was a great performance. Many people have come forward to say that the person behind Lene should do voiceovers or voice recordings, but it was very convincing. This whole plot was elaborate, but the the legwork was done to make it appear believable. So eventually, while Manti's having the worst of his life, he gets news that his grandmother has died. He's trying to process this, and Lene isn't getting the attention that she wants. So Lene has her brother, who was actually the person behind Lene, call Manti to say that, like, oh, she's lost her battle with cancer. She died. What? It's unbelievable. So now Manti is like double sorrow, right? Double grieving. I've lost my grandmother. I've lost my girl. I still have to go out here and play this football game. And as you all know, America, people in general, but America really loves a good success story, right? Really love someone who's gone through it. Now you've reached this level of success, someone who really pushes through and perseveres. And this was this story. He goes out, he wins the game, he has a stellar game. They're coming off of an amazing year, right? Amazing winning streak. And so Manti's like, this is really hard, the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I lost my grandmother, I lost my girl, but I know that they're with me. I know that I'll see them again. This is for them. If anything, Lene taught me to be humble and push through, and it's a very touching tale. And then eventually, this story just gets more and more insane. So hopefully you've seen it, and if you haven't, check it out. Eventually, the person behind Lene's account arranges so that they can meet with Manti in person. Once they meet with Manti in person, they do make a disclaimer that, oh, it wasn't like, oh, I finally got to see him in person. It wasn't some obsessed type story. That's how it read to me, but whatever. So once they saw Manti, it was like, oh, this isn't over. It's not over. This has to go on. So they do the unfathomable, and they reach out to Manti to say, like, hey, this is Lene. I'm not dead. They come up with some elaborate story, and Manti's like, WTF? What? He's gone through all this grief and sorrow and pain, and he's starting to get better, and it's this great story. The whole nation is behind him, so he's confused about what to do. He doesn't immediately go to his parents. Eventually, he goes to his coaches, but he had told all of them that he had met Lene. So the expectation is that he had met the person, Lene, but in actuality, he never had. So eventually, some reporters who I don't have kind words for, someone sends a clue to the reporter, and they're like, hey, you know that Manti story? It's not true. You should look into it. So they do this whole, what they would call a deep dive investigation, where they obviously did not do all of their due diligence and arguably did not respect their craft completely by getting all the information before going live. They make their excuses in the documentary, but whatever. So eventually they run this whole expose that Manti's girlfriend doesn't really exist, and the person behind the story is actually a guy, and Manti's gay, and all of these things, which completely destroys his image. People then, especially the press was deplorable. The way that the nation turned on him, I'm not surprised, but to see it, goodness gracious. And mind you, he's still young, right? So he's going to do a lot. And in the words of Jay-Z, they love you, then they hate you, then they love you again. But he was definitely going through this season of like being adored and praised and being just a essentially confirmed first round draft pick, right? His life was set. And then this horrible thing happens. He's the victim here. But everyone turns on him, paints him as a villain, as if he was in on it. Something that shouldn't even have mattered, but a large part of the focus becomes on his sexuality and whether or not he's gay, and that's anti-football culture, and so many people don't want to touch him anymore, right? He's not really as desirable as before. The media kind of runs him in, not even kind of, the media definitely runs his name in the dirt. It's just horrible, right? If you've ever been a part, like if you've ever seen the way media can handle a scandal and when they paint someone as a villain, And this was pre quote unquote cancel culture, but he was definitely canceled. And I'm emphasizing all of this because it's important and it gets to my purpose for even discussing this. So he is absolutely villainized, right? While all this is going on, the draft comes up. He can't really defend himself in the media. You know how publicists and folks do. He can't say much. The university's trying to protect itself. It's a lot. Okay, so now it's time for the draft. So even though all of this is going on, he's still an amazing player, right? Who's has a stellar record. Obviously, he's going to still be a first round draft pick. Wrong. 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 Absolutely not. And that's important because so much money that he would have been guaranteed, he doesn't get, right? You don't get that. He becomes a second round draft pick. And so, yeah, on one level, it's like he's grateful, like he's still got to play in the NFL, but he never sees the potential that was before him, right? And the 4 years from that time until today, probably until this documentary came out, that became his reputation. He couldn't live it down. He became a joke. People didn't take him seriously. So much so to the point that he suffered from anxiety. He couldn't play as well as he did. He questioned himself, something that came so easily to him. His skill on the football court, he now questioned. He was in his head. He couldn't play as well. This went on for years until eventually he went to therapy. Thank God, right? He went to therapy. He found some answers. They really worked on, did you forgive the other person? He's like, yeah, I have. And it's like, but have you forgiven yourself? Which I think is the hardest part for all of us, and especially someone like that. I get his personality all too well, where you've always been this leader. You've always felt in control of your life, of your destiny. You've put in all of this work, years and hours of training, right? Endurance, dedication, working on your craft, sleepless nights, making sure that this dream you have can come to fruition. And for something outside of your control, right? You trying to be a good person, you trying to be open and caring and kind, and it backfires on you. Now you're dealing with all of this trauma. Now you're dealing with all of these new insecurities. And eventually you come through and you find and deliver grace for everyone. And he came out at the end of the documentary where I could just burst into tears. He's still so kind, so merciful, so graceful to everyone, right? To all of the people who ridiculed him. But the thing that was most impactful for me is that he's kind to the person behind Lene. He wishes them nothing but the best, prays for them and their family, that they are well. He wants nothing less for them. And when I tell you, that struck me in such a deep place, for him to have gone through all of that and to be so, I can't say it enough, so graceful to the person behind the most traumatic moments in your life, to the person who has caused the most painful and difficult moments in your life, for you to still sit there and say, I wish them nothing but the best. Whoa. Hey, you're a better human than me. And this really caused me to reflect, and this is where I'll get a bit personal. So many people who know me closely and intimately know that my brother was killed in 2006 by his baby mother, by the mother of his daughter. And I have struggled with anger and resentment about this for a really, really long time, right? This happened in 2006. It's 2022, I'm still mad. I'm still very angry. I'm still very pissed. I still, mm, I do not have kind words. I do not have kind thoughts. I do not have good energy for that person, right? And so I've been in therapy about this. I've prayed about this. I've tried group counseling for this. I've done everything within me to heal from this, and I'm still working on it. It's still a work in progress. I'm currently reading I Am Diosa, working on this. I recently got my brother's name engraved on a necklace to really commemorate him so I can carry him with me. I'm trying to release it from my body, but still honor him. And so, all of that is to say that Manti really caused me to reflect. It's already something I'm working through, but I'm just like, wow, the ability to be that merciful and graceful after all of that, that's a level of human I'm trying to reach. It's a level of peace I'm desiring to know. So I guess my question for all of us is, how do you get there? This is something I'm still working on. I do not have the answer. Okay, I have no answers for this as I've laid out for you all. But I am curious. And outside of religion, and I listen, the Most High, I'm working on rebuilding that connection for myself. But outside of religion, right, I think that that's something that Kim from, or Kimberly from For Harriet really touched on with her review is that that's something that Christians kind of have over the rest of us who are not, that innate belief that all things happen for a reason. He seemed very at peace, and I'm really trying to get there. Really trying to know that, okay? What's that? Peace beyond understanding. Really trying to reach that level. And I'm just curious if any of you have been through something like this. I know I have what is now considered complicated grief. And, you know, my ability to even sit here and talk about it right now and not cry, I'm really impressed with myself. And hopefully the things that I'm working on healing are healing. But I know that I still have a long way to go. And I know that years ago I tried to paint over it and be like, oh, I forgive that person. I absolutely do not. I quickly realized soon after that I don't. And it didn't take me very long to realize that I don't. But my question is just, how do we do that? How do we reach that level of grace for those when it's not warranted and they arguably don't deserve it? And trust me, I've heard all the arguments that you release the anger for yourself and not for them, and I agree. But in my case, I've found it easier said than done. But I do want peace, so I'm really trying to figure out how to honor my brother and keep him with me and release the anger at the same time. And so that's really just what I wanted to come on here and share. I wanted to share that story with all of you. But the point of it all was really to get to that last piece. How do we make peace with the things that have happened to us? Especially in situations when it wasn't your fault and you had absolutely no control, but it cost you so much. So many of my dreams from my life were initially connected to my brother. So I've said for a long time that I have been living for a long time with my heart outside of my chest. Yeah. And so again, I have no answers here. I have none. I'm just a soul with questions, a soul who's on this journey of really, really trying to heal and really, really trying to be my highest self. So if you have answers, if you have thoughts, or if you have experienced something similar and you just need a space to feel heard or to know that you are not alone in your suffering, I wanted to share this for all of us. And I really do pray that we all find healing and we all find peace because I think we deserve that. And so that's it for me, y'all. Again, more questions than answers this time around, but I think that's okay too, right? Sometimes the road and the path to finding answers is to acknowledge that you don't know. I'm someone who is a firm believer in I don't know, right? I don't know. I have no problem with saying I don't know. I can go learn, but right now I don't know. So I'm trying to learn here. But until the next one, I am your illustrious hostess, Ms. Malcolm Hughes. I want each of you to remember that as long as you can rest well each night with the decisions you've made during the day, and as long as you can face yourself in the mirror each morning with the decisions you've made at night, none of the rest really matters. It's all chatter in the end. And so now we're going to head out to the tunes of Aquellos Días by El Chaval de la Bachata.